All right, we are live again.
Okay, then we should take out the starting soon banner. There we go. We managed. So welcome everybody to essentially the closing panel of Connect. Um, Thank you all for joining us in this conference, and I hope you had a great time. One last reminder for us, we are actually going to attend in-person drinks in London. We'll post the link in the event chat, the location, if you want to join us. And with that, essentially, we'll start introducing our panel from this evening. And we'll go with Violet.
Hey.
Hey, Violet.
Long time no
Jonatan.
see.
Yes.
Yes. Should I do an intro in case anyone wasn't in the last session?
Go for it.
Please do.
All right. Hi, I'm Violet. I teach at Columbia in the Graduate School of Architecture, Planning, and Preservation, and advise on a master's program there. And I'm also a director of product at Sidewalk Labs on our generative design product called Delve.
Cool.
Next up.
Thanks for next up. Should we Guy? Good morning, Guy.
Hey,
I
everyone.
hope you enjoyed your first cortado. Guy is joining us from very far away California. So good morning, Guy. He's a chief hacker at aec.works, and I'll let him introduce himself.
Cool. Yeah, I'm Talarico. I maintain aec.works. It's a tiny little website with a list of cool AC companies and startups that I think are cool. When I'm not doing that, I'm working at Airbnb, and I'm totally here not representing Airbnb.
He was legally bound to say this, right?
that was pretty smooth, right?
Cool. Next up, we've got Jonatan.
Hello, I'm Jonatan Schumacher. I work at Violet Labs. I'm heading up the engineering team there. That's it. I don't know. What else should I say?
Good morning, Jonatan.
Where are you joining us from?
I'm joining you from California, also in the South Bay.
And just as a quick note, Jonatan actually just rolled out of bed, but actually that's not an excuse because he has 3 kids or 2 kids. And
18 kids.
18 kids.
And I've not for
That's
4
not
hours,
village.
but I'm so
And he had a lot of duties to perform early in the morning. And last but not least, of course,
Hello.
who actually has a professional background in place.
Just so you can, I'm hiding the mess behind me. I'm Andrew Heumann, major grasshopper geek, and as of late, software developer at Hypar. I'm coming to you from New York City.
Cool.
Awesome. It's exciting. What are we going to talk about today, Violet?
Yeah, thanks everyone. I really love having this panel together because so often I just kind of drop in and out meeting some of the faces here in different environments. So it's actually really nice to just be all in the same screen. I'm sad I can't get drinks, but it's nice to all be together and just have the opportunity to talk a little bit about what I like to think as a hot market right now in the AEC, prop tech, spatial tech, urban tech space. Please say any that I haven't thought of. So what I wanted to kick us off with is, I come more recently from the kind of business and product mindset. So I'm always interested in what's influencing the market trends that we're seeing right now in architecture and this urban tech space. Starting to see tons of companies emerging. We're seeing architects really shift what they even do. So, in your point of view, what's actually creating this shift? What is actually leading to this current moment in time? And yeah, maybe we'll start with, does anyone want to start, or I'll just ask someone?
Violet, you didn't give us the chance for the host to actually drop politely out of the conversation and leave you.
Oh yeah, sorry. Please take the opportunity.
We'll be
We
here
will do
if you
so.
need us.
Yeah.
All right. Does someone want to pick that up? Too polite. Too polite. Jonatan, it's all
I
you.
mean, I have a few pieces. One is I think that now people of our age, people that are getting into the positions in companies where we can have sort of a bit of an opinion, kind of grew up as digital natives. So that's one thing. So we're just more used to sort of being exposed to technology from education onwards. Another trend is I think we've seen non-AEC companies venture into the we've seen technology companies from outside the industry venture into the industry. One of the early ones that comes to mind is Flux, for example, right? Like Google X had an internal product that they turned into a company, which
And
aimed
Nick
to disrupt.
Jim now, Nick Jim now, who is at Flux, is now doing a new startup called Neighbor.
Neighbor, yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly. So
keep going. I'm just trying to
So that's
impress
another
you all with
trend.
my
I think
market
that
trend knowledge.
we just we see others wanting to disrupt our industry. I'm sure Andrew's going to cover this part about Grasshopper, but I think Grasshopper has introduced the idea of software development to many of us as well, including myself, including everyone I think that's probably sitting in this panel. And so again, we've all kind of grown up into with a mindset that, hey, we can actually build our own tools now, and eventually we build our own products. Like we all eventually started working at product companies or starting product companies even. Anyway, I'll stop for now. I'm sure.
Yeah, so it's kind of like in your viewpoint, like the super user and the emergence of folks actually being able to think about technology.
Yeah, I mean, I think like certainly the sort of Grasshopper generation has sort of come of age and taken on positions of power, as Jonatan was mentioning, at least to some degree. And I think also, there's just this sort of feeling in the air, I think, that people are maybe a little bit disillusioned with architecture as it's traditionally practiced. There's, I think, a feeling, and I feel like I've heard it come up in a lot of the talks today and throughout this conference, that there's sort of like a sense that sort of like architecture is traditionally practiced, the sort of like black cape vision of, we're just going to do this incredible, crazy shaped museum. The people are kind of like over it now. There's a sense that we're sort of like tired and feeling maybe even impotent with our capabilities with sort of design conceived that way. And so I think a lot of designers have moved into arenas where maybe they feel like they can actually have a greater impact potentially on the built environment or just on the world by working through technology and thinking about new relationships between technology, business models, and space and the buildings and the world that we inhabit.
Yeah, like a personal take for me on this is to even think about how I've changed. It's like since graduating, right? So when I was in school, my ultimate goal was like a cool designy studio of some sort, and then as I started working, I guess I realized I was less interested on that and like in the dynamics of how design of big buildings happen. You realize that out of hundreds, maybe like 2 people are actually going to get to do anything cool. And in the beginning, I'm trying to figure out what else I can focus on. It's like, okay, I'm not even that good of a designer. I kind of suck at it. So what else can I focus on? And I got really good at renderings, right? And that was kind of like a way for me to find value and do something that I actually enjoyed as well. Eventually, I also got into kind of the grasshoppery and tech side. Like, can we make this process smoother, grease the wheels, or, I started getting really good at Revit, and I found out that had a lot of value. People are like lining up your desk asking for, Revit help or something. And I started realizing it's like, well, there's a lot I can do, a lot of value I can bring that's not just being a good designer or being really great at detailing, but it's actually being kind of a good, technologist. And that was sort of like stage 2, right? And then stage 3, which I think it's a little bit of a kind of self-perpetuating thing, but I think, if I'm not mistaken, the first kind of click was actually Flux, because I saw kind of a cool tech company doing something with tech, and I'm like, wait, like I can actually be there instead of being on the client side. I can actually be only doing 100% of that, and that was a really cool kind of realization. And since then, I think this was like, I don't remember, it was 2015 or something. It's just been like exponential, right? And then like 2 years later, I hear that like Google's hiring BIM people. I'm like, what? And then like the WeWork kind of thing happened, where it was just like hundreds of like cool architecture technologist people all together, and software, everyone, and yeah, it's just been incredible to watch. And again, it's self-perpetuating, right? Because now you're seeing people graduated, and they see that they don't have to go work at an architecture company. They can actually go do, technology. And for me, the most exciting thing and the biggest plus, which I think is a win-win for everyone, is that, oftentimes I actually think one of the coolest things about working with AC, even if I'm on the technology side, is to actually get to work with architects. I've spent time with like only engineers, and that's great too, but it's a different mindset. I love being with architects and working with architects. They have a different way of thinking. They're really cool to hang out with. And I think like this opportunity that we actually get to do both, it's really incredible, and I'm really happy that it's happening sort of in the earlier stages of my career.
Yeah, totally. I feel like you're all kind of circling around this idea that it's the kind of upward education into technology that architects are starting to adopt. But then also, I like your way of saying this kind of it's like a self-fulfilling prophecy, or it's cyclical, that it builds on itself. Like the culture becomes more attuned to this, thus creating more companies, thus creating more opportunities. So it's kind of building up in that way. I wonder as well, like Andrew, you mentioned this, that there's also a kind of shift in incentives or in the kind of business side. What do you all think about that? What is shifting right now in market trends, or like what is it about business models that technology affords that's allowing the kind of business or value proposition to change a bit?
I mean, maybe we can zoom out even further. And I think one thing that every industry is going through, the digital transformation right now, or like people call it like disruption. Like we've all seen, I don't know, whatever, finance or travel or retail or whatever it is, like having changed significantly in the last 10, 15 years. And so I think all of the traditional services companies are sort of watching as well, and trying to figure out like what is it that we can do, not to be surprised one day, like not to be like the Macy's or whoever, and the Barnes and Nobles. And so I think,
oh no, I love that it's become like this go-to phrase, the Barnes and Nobles.
I don't know, but I think it's really interesting. So I've seen a lot of AEC firms like really thinking about how to productize some of their knowledge, like how to turn it into, like how to generate IP based on their experiences and based on their knowledge, and then productize it. And I think that's just super interesting and super valuable. Like it's really hard to do. It is really a difficult sector to just kind of get into from outside, I think.
Yeah, like you're actually seeing architecture firms recognize, okay, I have this service that's like this streamlined thing I do over and over. And then you see things like, oh, there's some like billing system I can just use that exists already. Oh, there's already this kind of like streamlined templates that I have for laying out buildings. Why don't I just put that together? So they're like thinking in this more scalable way as well.
Yeah, and I really like that. Like as an example, Thornton Tomasetti does a lot of facade inspections, right? Like they go around and go up tall buildings in New York City that need to be inspected every, I forget, 5 or 6 years, and it costs a lot of money, like to put up the scaffolding, etc. So first they were like, can we just mount a camera to the drone and just like take pictures that way and save the scaffold? And then they were like, can we write an algorithm to find cracks in the photos? Like, can we teach a model how to detect, a severe crack? And so they did that. And then they were like, oh, now that we have this, can we actually productize it? And then they started another company, and now they're offering that as a company, as a product. And I think that's just like, to get to that, like that just requires a ton of domain expertise to get that right. And yeah, I think it's great. Like, it's a really good example for what AEC firms are doing to disrupt themselves, essentially.
Yeah, what I think you all also talked, like Flux was a technology company coming into architecture, and we also have architects kind of adopting technology. What's the right balance there? Do you have an opinion about technology companies coming in to the architecture space or vice versa? I know I have my biases, but before I taint this, would love to hear others.
Yeah, I mean, when Flux first emerged, I think it was really like a wake-up call to a lot of designers that radically different technology landscapes and business models were possible, and that they were a threat. I mean, I used to use Flux as sort of a scaremongering tactic when I would give talks to architects and say, look, if we don't take ownership as a profession over how automation and technology unfold, someone else is going to come in and do it for us, and we might not like the results. And so I think it's interesting. I think there's a really interesting back and forth between sort of like what technology and technological capabilities afford to our practice, but also the sort of genuine, deep complexity and knowledge of the discipline in itself. And I think that, there are lots of stories about why Flux maybe failed, but I do think that one piece of it can be seen to be maybe, certainly their early vision for this sort of fully automated architecture, I think fell on its head a little bit because of a degree of hubris about how complex is design? Like, can we can just automate this? How hard could it be? And I think a recognition that, like,
you look at any BIM model, you're like,
yeah, it's like, it's actually incredibly complex. And, I think what's been really interesting to see is the sort of back and forth and the sort of swinging of knowledge in both directions. So some of that product-oriented mentality has been brought back into architecture firms. And similarly, knowledge from architectural practice is working its way out into tech. And I mean, I'm very proud of the fact that Hypar's team is like majority AEC background. Like, we almost all of us come from architecture or engineering, and that allows us to have a degree of sort of empathy for the user and an understanding and a respect for the complexity of the problems themselves. And I think we're a long way from really being able to tackle all of that complexity, but at least we understand that it's there. We're not falling into the trap of imagining, oh yeah, we'll just automate that part of it. How hard could it possibly be?
Yeah, and I think between the two, if I had to pick, I know it's a balance, but if I had to pick, I generally find that the ones that have sort of architecture and kind of technologists come in and try to figure out how to build it tend to be smoother or maybe more successful than when there's a bunch of technologists that think that there's an opportunity in kind of AC and they try to do something kind of in a vacuum. And I've seen quite a few examples of that just going terribly wrong, because they like oversimplify the problem and they're really not aware of all the kind of the realities of the industry. And they pump a bunch of money and then they realize that it doesn't really work that way, and it takes them a long time to find that out. And I've seen you see a lot of examples that kind of go both ways. I don't know if there's a term for it, but whether it's like architecture driven or technology driven, which one kind of came first or stronger, but tends to balance one way or the other. I generally find that the architectural ones are a little bit more successful.
Yeah, I actually, so right now at Outer Labs, I'm experiencing the hybrid, right? Like we have both architects turned into engineers, but we also have computer scientists that have always been computer scientists. And I think this is actually a really nice combination. And one term that we recently found out about that we've kind of always understood we had, but there's like an official term, it's product engineer, which is definitely what Andrew and Guy are as well. And it's basically the engineer that understands the user really, really well. But then there's also the infrastructure engineer or the DevOps engineer, like the person that just understands how to scale and like how to make sure it's secure and how to make sure, like those things that we didn't learn in architecture school, and that takes us a long time to kind of grasp. And I really like the combination of the two. So we have more sort of user-facing engineers, often coming from an AE background, and then the heavy-duty like hardcore engineers doing more of the infrastructure tooling and those kind of things, and both are really important together.
Yeah, I really can't disagree with that. I feel like I really like this. Like, I can't stress enough the importance of having folks that are from the architecture technology space working on these types of problems, because there can be a bit of a naivety or like not understanding the complexity of the problem. And I think there needs to be a kind of not just like respect, but just like an appreciation for that knowledge, or else you're gonna misestimate or misinterpret how to approach these types of problems. But I also have this maybe that there's a whole swath of folks that are have like a partial burning or scarring from the architecture industry, and I might put myself in that camp as well, where I think architects sometimes try and do too much. They're like, I'm going to design the website and I'm going to build it straight from HTML, and I'm going to design all the doorknobs, and we're going to have our own graphic design department. It's like, whoa, I think there's also a utility of knowing where you have expertise, and I think we do around, like, we understand like geometry technologies, we understand BIM, we understand the systems, and it's not that we have that deep technical expertise, but like, should we be building the cloud computing and like all the machine learning? It's like we really need to find a way, and I also see this in the industry where like I want architecture firms that are like, oh, we'll just do that in-house, we'll just make our own product. It's like, well, then you're going to need to invest in it a little differently. Then you're not going to pay someone $40K a year to stand up a product. Like, you have to actually invest in it. So I just want I feel like there needs to be like a kind of mutual respect, or like some sort of balancing there.
And I do think that like part of the reason why Grasshopper took off was because it removed a lot of the need for sort of like additional technical knowledge. You didn't need to know how to compile anything, and you didn't need to know how to build from source, and you didn't need to know how to like install a package with the command line or whatever. And that had this incredible unlocking effect on, you could basically be the product engineer for your team, where all you were focused. I mean, yes, there was some geometric knowledge involved, but you could really focus on like, this is how I'm encoding the expertise that I have and putting it to work for my practice without having to like learn this whole entire skill set. And I think it's great when architects who have these capabilities go out and learn new tools. But I also feel like, when somebody learns how to deploy a Docker image to Heroku for the purposes of like just building their AEC app, like I feel like that's a little bit of a failure in the sort of infrastructure that's available to our industry. It's obviously something Hypar wants to correct, but I think and Speckle too, I think, is making this stuff more accessible to a wider audience. But I think that trajectory needs to continue like crazy. Like, we need to really push at the, I think in your talk, Violet, you use the term end user programming. I think we need to like accelerate the degree to which these sorts of complex and truly sophisticated AEC apps can be accessible to be built by the end user at the end of the day.
Yeah, one thing that I see it happen a lot. I think probably like on a monthly basis, we end up going through some sort of exercise like this at work, where we call like, build or buy, where like we have some kind of big problem and we know that there are tools that do that, but we're not sure if they do exactly what they want or how much it's going to cost versus like how much it's going to build. And at least in my days in architecture, I hadn't done this type of exercise. Maybe this happens more often these days that there are more tools available, but we do it quite often. And I think it's really important exercise, right? Like if you were to build it, you really have to understand, do we have the skill sets? We're going to be able to build this out. What does it take to maintain? That's always the part that's underestimated, of course. And what will be the benefits? And oftentimes it's really a nuance. Like maybe it makes sense to buy it now just to speed things up, and then at a bigger scale we may need to rebuild. It's always complex. It's never like a straightforward answer. But yeah, in architecture, at least when I was there, I always wanted to build it because that would just get me out of whatever other thing they wanted me to do, and I would just get to nerd out and try to build something. So
maybe the tools, like Andrew was saying, like didn't really exist either. So like you learned how to do all these very technical things almost out of necessity. Yeah, and I think that this I like the buy versus build framework, and I think maybe more of that that business thinking should exist. We should adopt it even more so in architecture firms, and say like, yeah, you know what, we're really good at this thing, but like let's not build this whole thing from scratch 10 years later.
Yeah, I feel like I'm heavily biased towards buying now because at the surface, something always looks interesting and doable. And then as soon as you start digging, you're like, oh my God, this is so complicated. and now I'm like, I just want to, if there's something that works and we can integrate it, like that's, that would be much easier.
The hardest part is the maintenance, right? Like maybe even working through a complicated problem as an engineer is still fun, but then like the next engineer has to actually like understand what you did there and fix the bugs, and that gets really frustrating. So
amazing to build initially.
Like, let the other person fix it.
Yeah, Jonatan, I remember you telling me about like even Costro, like the amount of time you spent just on like support, and bug fixing, just sometimes it's totally disproportionate to the amount of time you spend actually building something out.
It's all sexy in the beginning.
Rolling out a new feature is easy, but then when people start using it slightly differently than what you anticipated, then that's kind of the hard part.
Yeah. And then all the libraries are out of date, and oh my gosh.
Yeah, right. Yeah, that's true. Yes, because we had 8 plugins for 8 different desktop applications, so they would be upgraded every year, and so we constantly had to keep up to date with that.
I love this scrolling bug fixing over new features. So looking ahead, we talked a little bit about like what has made the market the way it is today. What does the world look like in 10 years for, let's just say, this umbrella industry? I won't list them all again, but urban tech, AEC. What's it going to look like in 10 years? And more specifically, what's actually exciting to you about that future? Like maybe there are dystopian futures, but what does the ideal future look like? I think there's a lot of ability to harness. I feel a lot of ownership over this industry. Like I think it's small enough that there's an ability to kind of set the culture of what we want this industry to look like. So what does that ideal future look like in 10 years? And what does it look like maybe even for architects?
One trend that I really appreciate is that, okay, so one thing that we see right now in the traditional industry is that, the architect is the designer, and then there's like a developer, there's a designer, there's subs, etc., and then there's the owner, and the owner and the designer are extremely disconnected. Like whoever made the building does not understand how it is actually being used. And one, I think, big trend that we're seeing is that that is changing, that more and more owners are becoming sophisticated around the design and delivery process as well. As an example, WeWork, own the whole pipeline from design to operations to sales to redesign. We just saw Kanoa's presentation, right? Like that's a really nice example of the same idea, essentially, where this is even more progressive because it's now a subscription model of that service, but again, the design process is sort of integrated with the operations thereof. And what is nice about this is that then, as a designer, you can think about the big picture being sustainability and landfill, for example. Like I really appreciate that Google came out and said, in 5 years or in 9 years from now, all of our operations will be energy neutral without even using carbon credits, and they're operating, huge data centers. And I think in order to do that, they have to think about how the buildings are designed. Like they have to be designed from the get-go with as many alternative resources, et cetera, as possible. I think that's really changing right now.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with all of that. I have I could probably talk for an hour on the sort of utopian vision of the future of technology and architecture, but I'll try and do my best to keep it
solving
brief,
global capitalism.
We're not going to get that far today. But I do think that there's, Daniel Davis in his talk highlighted really well this trend towards this kind of verticalization. And sometimes that can happen under the, literally within a corporation, a company is taking on more of the parts of design all the way through to delivery. And I think we'll continue to see Kanoas spring up that are kind of focused really narrowly on one particular part of the built environment and building technology that supports it and integrating all of those things and kind of changing the incentive structure there. And I think that's a good thing. I think that's necessary for a lot of the kind of big changes that need to happen. I also think that architecture as practiced isn't going anywhere. It's not being replaced. The change that I would like to see there is, not necessarily a radical restructuring of every architecture firm on the planet into a sort of vertical organization, but sort of a deeper commitment to knowledge sharing and expertise sharing through technology. I think the sort of first wave of this is the Food for Rhinos of the world, where everybody writes their cool scripts and their plugins and put them up online for people to try.
Plugin.
Yes. And I think that's great. It was sort of the first step, but there's a reality in the current tech landscape that making those things actually plug together and work together so that, somebody without a ton of technical expertise can just plug and play and grab all of these, sort of pretty intelligent tools and put them together is really difficult. Obviously, at Hypar, we believe that there can be a mechanism to do this, a way to sort of express and encode architectural expertise in a way that it can be shared and in an interoperable way so that I can grab your strategy for generating the structure and you can grab my facade generator, and together we can sort of, bring more intelligence to the design process. And now there's something kind of radical about that, because on the one hand, it just means less reinventing the wheel within an architectural practice, but it also has a more profound consequence, which is that expertise becomes available to communities that were not served well by architectural expertise in the past. And so I think emerging economies that need to build huge amounts of housing and other things can conceivably be supported by more and more intelligent tools that have built into them some of the things that we know as architects about what makes spaces sustainable and effective and constructible and economical and all of that stuff. So I think this sort of move to build a sort of community of knowledge around shared code expertise in a way where it's not just a bunch of individual apps that you download, but there's sort of a seamless integration of all of those things. That's what I want to see emerge over the next decade.
Yeah, we see, one way I think about it is, at least during the last few years, when I my change into WeWork, was interested in talking to former coworkers, because it felt like there was a little bit of a fear because WeWork was actually taking some of the work. So they would get hired to renovate offices or to even build office space. And we were come in and basically taking some of that work away, kind of taking little bites out of the industry. I think this is like one example, and I think one of the trends we'll see more of that happening, right? So the other one that I've been particularly keeping an eye on is like the ADU space, right? There is, in aec.works alone, there's like 22 companies that I know of that are like productizing ADU as a thing that you can just go and buy. And there's, I don't know if you guys know, Duelito was like a little marketplace.
Yeah. And for folks on the phone, ADU is like backyard, building a building in your backyard.
Yeah, granny flat. Yeah, so accessory dwelling units. There was, I don't know if it's just California. I think it's a bunch of states. They've passed some regulations that make it really, really easy to add them, and to kind of help with housing stock. So that helped this huge spring up of companies that are trying to figure out how to get this to work. But I think this is just like another example. And as I was thinking about this, I'm like, in a way, this kind of happened is actually not that new, right? Maybe even like, if you think about single family housing, I mean, I don't know of anyone who's hired an architect to build their own house from scratch. Like, I'm sure this happens, but at least in the US, I think in other countries it's still more common. In the US, that has kind of disappeared, or at least been reduced substantially, like over the last century, right?
It's
like
expensive.
Builders just build, and because they've integrated and they're really efficient at it. So it's kind of happened. It wasn't driven by technology, but it's already happened maybe out of necessity. And I think WeWork and other kind of co-working places were showing that they could do that to kind of workplace design. And again, I agree with you, Andrew, like they're not going to disappear, but I think there'll be bites kind of taken out of it. And eventually you're going to be left with kind of the parts that maybe they're really essential or better at that can't be fully kind of replaced. And then the other aspect that we've touched on as well, it's like what happens with the people in the industry as that's happening, right? And the same thing, these little new ways of building AC outside of AC are emerging. People are kind of jumping ship, right? And it's just kind of fragmented, and I think that's good, right? It gives people more opportunity, as they come out of school. I always remember, Andrew, do you remember the Designalize interviewees?
Oh yeah.
Are you familiar with this, Violet? I don't remember who did it.
Please tell me.
I did it.
Oh, you did it. Okay.
Yeah. It was basically everybody that had been on the Designalize podcast with Brian Ringley and Zach, and like where they had gone and what companies they had moved to and all of that stuff. And there was definitely
please, you got to share this.
I'll see if I can dig it up while we're talking.
Yeah, what I was thinking is like WeWork at the time, we were there, and actually all three of us were working together there. It was kind of like a black hole, because like you would see all these people that were everywhere. They just like converged and got sucked into this, WeWork black hole. And the way I think about this, because I think there will be many more of these, right, in kind of other industries outside of the core like AC service, and naturally the same people jump ship because they're maybe more excited about working with the more technology or different business model that's not kind of the service industry. I think that there'll naturally be all these other places that they can easily jump. So I'm curious to see what this graph looks like. Maybe an updated version of this, Andrew, and then what it will look again in 10 years. But I would imagine it's much more fragmented.
You gotta project out into the future what you think folks are doing. It seems like we talked a little bit about the verticalization of companies doing end-to-end more. Also, you're talking a little bit about the productization of a lot of traditional services that's starting to take chunks out of the kind of traditional way of working. And Andrew, you're talking about shared programming, or the ability to kind of exchange product pieces between the industry. I think with the like productization, one thing I wonder about is, we saw WeWork, Katera, both Goliaths doing this like verticalization that I don't know if implode is the right word, but it something didn't work out. What happened there, and what's gonna change to make that work? Is there like a cap to how vertical you
IPO
can get?
happened today.
For WeWork?
Yeah.
Okay, you got to tell us more about that.
No, but what happened, I mean, I think it was, like we talked about this earlier, maybe it was just a little bit too naive or too, I don't know, visionary for what could be done. There was also a ton of money involved that needed to be spent quickly, but I think a ton of enablement happened. Like, I don't know, I feel like everybody who worked there that I've talked to afterwards, it changed their perspective on what's possible and what they want to do with their career, right? Like, I don't know, Andrew.
Shoot for the moon and you land in the stars.
Yeah, no, but I think they've proven that something can be done much more effectively than what used to be done. Like, yeah, they have been co-working companies before, and they've grown, one office at the time, but WeWork could grow 20 offices at the time.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think there was anything like fundamentally wrong with the model, and there were a lot of things that were genuinely innovative. Like, it didn't fail because the approach to technology as it relates to space was a bad idea. It failed because, as you've mentioned, massive amounts of money made everybody a little bit crazy, and were encouraged to go a little bit crazy and make a bunch of bets that didn't make any sense. And there weren't enough maybe checks and balances in the sort of company governance to prevent that from happening. I obviously can't speak to Katera, but I highly recommend the blog Construction Physics. Has a really, really interesting and detailed analysis. In fact, almost the whole blog is sort of about why did Katera fail? Why is this a hard thing? Highly recommend checking it out for a deeper look at that question.
Yeah, and I think the outcome was mostly that it was bad management, basically, right? But I also think the fact that some went wrong doesn't mean it's just the wrong thing to do, right? Like, for every startup that builds a new product, there were 8 others that tried to do something similar and failed, right? And eventually one gets it right. So I don't think it's necessarily at that end. But one thing that was interesting, and I think maybe that people are less familiar with that part of WeWork, but I think the office model, regardless of what ended up happening, I think it was a successful product. Like, I sort of experienced that working in a traditional kind of office space, and then when I went to work at a WeWork as a product, not the company, I actually really loved the space. I enjoyed it. I really enjoyed a lot of the things they've done with design, with kind of the vibe. I think they built a really good kind of design product. And during my time there, I saw a lot of the places that I used to work, our friends that work in different AC companies started building very similar products. So I think they had innovated even in the sense of design. One other part that maybe people didn't see it much, it was the We Live, right? I think they built 2 of them, and I had some friends that worked in that team, and that failed miserably. Because I think they were very naive in that sense, where they tried to apply the same formula, and they realized that residential was just not that easy, right? Commercial, you could literally gut it out and very cheaply just kind of build your fit out. And residential was not like that. Every unit had to have a bathroom. That's substantially more expensive, right? And when they were trying to rent out studios for $3,500, they realized that they just didn't have a business model, and they really pushed for it. They put a lot of money, and in the end, it never worked. They couldn't get the numbers to add up. So I think it was an example of lots of money and then just being naive and trying to think that they would make it work, but it just didn't. The numbers didn't add up.
Yeah, so it seems like maybe there is something useful in trying to verticalize more and investing a decent amount, but there's kind of an upper band there where you get too ambitious and you kind of lose grip on reality.
Yeah.
Larry Page likes to say that we shouldn't bet on double miracles, which means you can bet on one miracle that something is drastically going to change, but when you start making more bets, it's the thing my boss says is multiplying fractions. If you multiply fractions 2 things in their seedling stage, you get a smaller number. So you got to kind of allow things to come to their own fruition first.
Yeah, I mean, I really like how Amazon went about it, right? They started with books and then CDs and DVDs, and then everything else. And then they started thinking about delivery and like, groceries and other things. But they couldn't have just like built everything on day one. And WeWork was just trying to do too many things too quickly. Like maybe after 10 years of successfully operating in the co-working world, maybe you can open a daycare. I don't know if that makes ever sense, but
yeah, but don't do it right
yeah.
out of the gate with everything else at the same time. Yeah. So wonder if, maybe as a last question, and we still have time, so feel free to discuss about this. For advice you would give either to folks graduating, people looking to further their careers within this space, maybe they're already in this space, what advice would you give to them, or like maybe that you wish someone had given to you at some point, to just know how to navigate this space? Like what can they do to help shape where this industry is going?
Come work for us.
That's great.
I mean,
us instead. Us.
Yeah. For me, I think there are sort of like two related things. One is, I think, like recognizing or sort of breaking out of this idea that like the best thing you can do for yourself is go work for Rem Koolhaas. Like, sort of like imagine, no offense if any OMA people are in the audience, but that the highest value that architecture can provide is like these really singular projects. I think Daniel Davis said it incredibly well in his talk, this idea of the sort of potency or power of the fat middle, of kind of like the spaces that we all live in and occupy. And architects are maybe less involved in those things. And it's certainly not what we're taught to think about in school. And so like pay attention to what is it about the spaces that we occupy every single day that works, and how would you want to change it, and how would you want to shape that world. And maybe it doesn't involve, making a giant Boolean sphere and smacking it in the middle of some town square or whatever. Like who cares at the end of the day? And I guess the other piece of that is from a technological standpoint, I think, and it's actually not even really a technology thing, it's a mindset thing, which is like really practice thinking systemically. Like think and try and observe the systems and rules that are in play in the work that you're doing, and always think towards like hop one level of meta and say like what is the logic of the thing that I'm doing, not just I'm doing the thing, but like why and how am I doing the thing, because that is the skill set that enables this kind of like progressive scaling, and the ability to turn knowledge into code or whatever is all about this kind of act of identifying, analyzing, and abstracting the systemic parts of a process, without losing sight of the things that make it specific or particular.
Andrew, I love that as you're saying that, I feel like your shirt has like just system diagrams on it. And Andrew always has these phenomenal shirts that I have to comment on. But I really love that. Yeah, go ahead. I had to say it.
Nah, I was done.
I mean, I think it's important to just get different experiences while you can, like especially industry experiences, like do internships and research assistantships, and take a computer science class, and take a parametric modeling class, take Violet's class. Like just like experiment while you're, while you have the time. Because you don't have to commit to anything when you're like a student, which is nice.
Yeah, my advice, I think there's sort of two, I think specifically for people in the industry. One is to, learn technology in any way you can. It doesn't mean you have to, write a bunch of code, but we live in a super technological world, and anything you can add to your set of skills, just like knowing Excel never hurts anyone, right? You can always use it to crunch up some, I build Excel for options for everything I do in my life, basically. And I think, some extent, like being able to, write a script like even if it's not a full blown application or service, like I need to rename these in 47 files or something. I think it's really useful on AC or any other industry, and you can never lose from doing that. So I can always help. As far as like the changes in the industry, I think, as I was talking before, the experience, the opportunities that we have today. So also don't assume that you have to go work in an office and you have to go from an office to another office, but there are tons of these companies of companies building products around AC that can really benefit from architects. I think the way that we think and a lot of the skills that we have overall are really valuable. I was talking to someone this week who literally just quit their job after 10 years. They were incredible within the architecture company. They actually coded, they built a lot of things within their company. They had risen up in leadership and they kind of had enough. and they literally quit, and they were like, doing a boot camp now. And they were asking about my experience and what is it like if you do go to, to kind of the other side? Do I have to start from the beginning? What is it like? And I always talk about how valuable the architect's experience are. And I worked on a couple teams that had architects, engineers, and the skills that architects bring over are incredibly valuable. Like their way of kind of breaking a problem down, our ability to kind of orchestrate and think about kind of systems, I think is really valuable. Our kind of ability to present and convey ideas with diagrams, I've also found that has been incredibly helpful in my work. Compared to some of other folks I worked with, oftentimes I'm complimented on diagrams that come very natural to me because I've been diagramming my whole life, right? And I find them actually really helpful when you're talking about kind of system design. So yeah, I think if if you're looking to do other things that are not necessarily traditional architecture, just look at the smaller companies. Oftentimes they're hiring product engineers, or they're hiring architects. There's a lot of people kind of coming through kind of UI, UX. The architect community has a lot of those as well. And I think there's a lot of value that architects can bring and kind of be in that interstitial space.
And I think also product management, right? Like
absolutely.
I think that I really like everything that you all said, because Andrew, you're talking about really taking a much more systematic approach, which is really about keeping your eyes open. And I empathize with that a lot, where it's like, I feel like there are so many times doing things within architecture. Andrew, I've heard you talk about this in your talks before, where you're like, find yourself cutting out cardboard models and you're like, there must be a better way. Or like staying up late, you're like, there must be a better way. There probably is. You should probably, like, sometimes it's worthwhile to also kind of recognize that a system isn't working and change it. And Jonatan, you're talking a lot about like continuing to explore and stay really open while you can, like while you don't have all the pressures. And I think like this is the perfect moment to be doing that, when you have so much available to you. There's like a lot of innovation happening right now. And Guy, I think you have to share this cornucopia of possible places to work in this chat. Or what's the name of the website you've been?
Oh yeah, self-promotion here, even though
because I think really it is like you're saying, there's just a lot more available to us now that wasn't available before. And I think that people should just not be so afraid of it. I like the way that you were talking about this too, Guy. You're like saying there's so much expertise that we have within the industry. You feel like you're starting over to shift, but actually like the growth potential is probably so much higher when you switch, and you also have all this expertise that you didn't have prior to that. So
yeah, and there's two sides. There is the bringing of like the AC domain, and then there's the bringing of the type of soft skills that architects have and how valuable they are in building software. So I think it's sort of twofold.
Totally. I mean, Andrew Salveson in the chat was pointing out one of the things that I love about a sort of architectural education and mindset is precisely like, forget about buildings for a second, just the ability to sort of bridge between silos and synthesize information from many different domains. Like architects are masters at synthesis.
Yeah. All right. So final thing, and then I'll let you part ways. What is one thing that you personally are invested in your own career right now? So like you've given advice elsewhere, like what is one thing that you feel like you want to do more of personally to see the industry move forward? And you can think about this for a sec. You don't have to answer on the fly.
I would say that for me, it's 100% about developing the skill of listening to the end user and just like getting good and building up the courage to go ask a user for feedback and really listen to it. I think this is incredibly useful for architecture and it's incredibly useful for software. Like, you just have to be willing to like really care about whether the thing that you're building works. And as a coder and a geek, I get really excited. I'm like, I'm building a cool thing. This thing's so cool. It's awesome. And then you put it out in front of a user and they're like, here's the measure tool. That was the one I got the other day in a conversation. And I was like, like, yeah, it hurts to hear that, or to watch somebody use the tool that you're building, or to watch somebody occupy the space that you've designed in a way that like wasn't intended. But for me, I think it's critically important to just like continue to practice that and get good at it so that the things that we put into the world can work for people.
Yeah, for me, I think, I don't know if technology is the solution for this, but one thing I see in sort of the build world is that there's this kind of spectrum where, you have kind of like high quality, maybe like thoughtful design, good materials, and then you have like really efficient design, like your giant like home builders that are really just focused more on the business, right? And of course, I think they care about products maybe more than what people give them credit for, because they want them to work and sell. But there's like a quality issue, and there's maybe like even like a design, and I think there's not a lot in the middle. And they figured out how to take this and make it really, really efficient. And I think we've lost a lot kind of in the process, right? So, I wonder if there's a way to take kind of good, thoughtful design and make it more efficient. We're never going to be quite as efficient, but to kind of be somewhere in the middle, right? Recently I've been looking at homes for the last year. And I see that a lot. Like you either have, beautifully high-end, beautifully designed, totally out of reach, for anyone who's not a millionaire. And then you have just like kind of, massively scaled, somewhat low quality kind of housing stock. And there's not a lot in the middle, and I'm wondering if there's like an opportunity, decades to come to take this kind of good design and find a way to do it efficient enough to kind of land somewhere in the middle. Maybe already that exists. If someone knows, please send me the Zillow link.
I think Hypar is doing just that.
What's that?
Hypar.
Yeah.
Doing that, right, for single family.
Yeah.
Like basically, it's too expensive to hire the one-off architect. Like if the mortgage is whatever, if the whole building costs 500,000 and then the architect costs another 100,000, you just can't afford that cash. But you can afford the small fee to to use the really nice generative design tool to basically give you a custom-ish, a mass-tailored solution that suits you, basically.
Yeah, I was also thinking like Codecima. Have you seen that? It's like a prefab company. During my obligatory COVID think about purchasing houses phase, we talked about getting this prefab house. So you're seeing it also like kind of in prefab, but
yeah. My mission, or my what I'm focusing on right now, is to find clarity in the purpose basically of what we do, and to like A, uncover that, and then B, to help others understand that, like essentially to align people as best as possible, I think is really important. Yeah, just, I mean, you kind of said that as well, like diagrams can do so much, just like helping people understand like the bigger picture, or helping even uncover the bigger picture, like what is it even? And then like, let's define it together, and then let's work towards it. I think it's really important in software design.
All right, thank you all. I feel like this was super helpful. I enjoyed our conversation. I'll open it up in the well, actually, you all might have to leave. I was gonna say I'll take questions from the audience, but I think no. This is the end.
We can take questions from the audience. We can also take applause from the audience, or at least applause emojis from the audience. How about that? Let's see if that works.
Okay, I'll accept.
Thank you,
I'll
David.
accept
Yes. Come on, you can do better. Okay.
There were a lot of questions along the way, but I think they got a bit lost.
Yes.
Anyone has some last-minute questions they want to drop in? I see a lot of clapping. Positive.
They were trying to figure out how to put the emoji in the chat.
There's a button for that.
I had the funniest situation where someone just said to like, I don't remember what it was, just like a show of hands on some question they asked, and I was on a call, and I was like looking everywhere for the hand, and I was like, "What is wrong with me? What is wrong with me? You have a hand."
So I think this is an opportunity for us to thank all the audience. I just tweeted about this. We had an incredible number of registrations, like more than 1,300 people registered for the event, and we didn't expect to hit such a number. So thank you all for being so engaged and interested and enthusiastic about all the talks and presentations, but even more thanks to all the speakers who did a great job, and the panelists, even more.
And the Speckle team, obviously, for helping us organize this.
Yeah, this was amazing.
It was, come on, you know.
What a conference. Like, what are you going to do next year to top it?
I don't know. I saw Jan through the comments. Like, Ian said, maybe they're going to do a HyperCon. So, like, please do. It's a lot of work, guys.
Just tell him. He's doing it.
Whoever does it, please make sure there's beer on the West Coast.
We can have a physical conference maybe next year.
That would be great. Yeah. Well, there's definitely beer in London, like tin cans, but yeah.
But
okay.
the thing, we'll definitely repeat this in a way or another. We'll be planning our next event now.
Yes, and thank you. I think the panel ended in a wonderful way. Like, it was a very nice conclusion to what this conference actually wanted to be and communicate. So, hats off.
Great. Thanks, everyone, and goodbye. And have fun having drinks in London for those who can participate. We will be here in spirit.
Yep.
Some of us may be drinking, some may not.
Drink one for you.
Yeah.
All right. Bye.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.